The Raiders roster is really underrated. The greatness of the Raiders is ready to rise in 2024, featuring the most underrated roster in the NFL this season. That's right, the Raiders have the most underrated, slept on roster this season. I get it. The Las Vegas Raiders do not have a marquee quarterback. Certainly no Patrick Mahomes. Certainly no Josh Allen. And I would make a strong argument that with Justin Herbert on this team, you swap the Chargers and the Raiders quarterback play, this team would not only be in the playoffs, this team would be a contender. But in this video, I'm going to break down why the Raiders might be able to push their quarterback play a tier above what's expected, because this team has a mad, underrated roster and overall team in 2024. Gronk, spike the like button. Let me know if you agree in the comment section below. Are the Raiders the most underrated roster in football right now? Let me know if you agree or disagree. And if you disagree, provide your answer for the most underrated roster in the league. This means I'm talking about the talent on the team. I'm talking about the players, the individual talent of this team, as well as what we might be able to see from the offensive line, the defense as a whole, and of course, the weaponry. And where I want to start with the Las Vegas Raiders is their new identity. I think the biggest issue with Josh McDaniels and that Raider regime that lasted not very long, it lasted really shorter than anyone would have ever thought. And I'm a Josh McDaniels guy, obviously. I'm a Patriots fan. I love Josh McDaniels. I think he's an excellent offensive coordinator. I thought he would work out as a head coach. It didn't happen. Okay, we move on. But what has Antonio Pierce done to this football team? In my opinion, Antonio Pierce has installed a culture. He has installed a way of being, and that way is the Raider way. When you think of the Raiders, you think of the grittiness, the toughness, the intimidation. You think of high-flying, fast football. You think of physicality. You think of doing anything to win. And when you think of the Raiders' history, it's one to me that I highly respect, and it's one that has largely for this generation been missed. People don't know what the Raiders used to be about. But I feel the first coach in a long time to really install this grittiness to the Raiders is Antonio Pierce. He was a former player, a linebacker, a Super Bowl champion, and a tough you-know-what on the football field. And he brings that to the Raiders. And we saw that instantly last year, the change from McDaniels to Pierce. Players want to play for him. Players admire him. Players like him. He's not as schematically sound. He's not as schematically intelligent, X's and O's wise as a Josh McDaniels. But what he is he has an aura. He has a presence. He has leadership traits. And he clearly has his team playing a gritty physical style. And that begins at the line of scrimmage. And this is where this team is the most underrated in football. The line of scrimmage of the Raiders is really promising in 2024. You start with the offensive line. Kolton Miller has been one of the best left tackles in the NFL for a while. I believe they signed him long-term when John Gruden was there, if I'm not mistaken. He graded as the 11th best tackle in pro football in 2023, and he's largely been a top 10 tackle in the NFL for about 5 or 6 years. It really feels that way. At the right tackle position, they have one of the more underrated right tackles in football, second-year pro from a year ago, Munford Jr. He graded as the 25th best tackle according to Pro Football Focus in 2023, and he was a top 10 run blocker, 8th in the NFL. And we saw really Antonio Pierce when he took over the team. McDaniels, they had a strong running game. But what did Antonio Pierce do? He just basically took that strength and just absolutely pushed it to the brink. Like, we're going to run the ball. This is what we are. We don't have a great quarterback. We're going to run the ball. We're going to be physical. We're going to play good defense. And in many ways, this is why I think Antonio Pierce might be the next Dan Campbell. He has that mentality of players. He has this gritty approach that they can really as players and as a team kind of like grasp and understand how they need to play to win games. And that is just as important as anything. That's just as important as a great quarterback, is the identity of a team. Look at like Mike Vrabel's Titans a few years ago. That was a team that didn't have a superstar quarterback, but they knew how they had to play to win. You see the same thing with Dan Campbell and the Lions and how that has grown. The strength of the offensive line now becoming the strength of a running game, setting up play action, then defense. The Raiders can be the same thing here when we continue to look at the offensive line. It's great. It's deep. Like Andre James, top 10 center in the NFL, 9th in the NFL last year, according to PFF. At the guard position, Dylan Parham graded as the 36th best guard in the NFL in his second season. So now Parham and Munford enter year 3, I believe. Year 3 or year 4 for Munford, I can't quite remember. But both of them are ascending football players at their positions. And then you have Colton Miller, who's a stud, Andre James, who's kind of just broken out to becoming a top player at his position. You sign somebody like Andres Pete, who has been a solid tackle or guard no matter where he has played for the New Orleans Saints, former first-round pick long time ago, played on some really elite offensive lines in New Orleans when Drew Brees was there, and he's been a really physical player that's great in the running game especially, and his kind of skill and what he brings has been, I think, kind of like lost in New Orleans a little bit. But he's very versatile, so whether they have an injury at tackle or an injury at guard, he could definitely slip in there, and maybe he might even start at guard to begin the year, because obviously JPJ, Jackson Powers-Johnson, is the rookie second-round pick that was a center at Oregon and is kind of looked at to me as like a really promising, almost like a Marquise Pouncey type of center, where he's like physical and, you know, that type of power run blocking center that I think they really, really want in Las Vegas. This is a power running team. This is pull the guard. This is smash mouth. This is downhill. And I think he really fits, but he's also got a great anchor in the pass protection department. When you watch some of his tape from college and you watch the Senior Bowl and things like that, I think he was super impressive. I was surprised he wasn't a first-round pick. I thought that was another steal pick. And we saw the Raiders' capacity in the draft to just straight up pick ballers in the draft. Like straight up ballers. Okay, like just pick the best player available. And we'll get to their first-round pick here in a second. But Powers-Johnson, whether it's at guard or center, I think is going to be a contributor in year one, but potentially more down the road if they feel like he is not really a translation to guard, but only center. So we'll see how that works out. They also brought in like Cody Whitehair to back up and be like the 6th man of the offensive line, or maybe even potentially the 7th, depending on how the offensive line shakes out. But just look at the resources they've put into this line. Like obviously Colton Miller was always there and signed, but you sign Pete, you sign Whitehair, you draft JPJ, and you have the other pieces still there. Like, this is big-time resources. You typically don't see an offensive line that's this good in the starting department, but then also has, like, proven NFL vets like a Cody Whitehair as their 7th offensive lineman. Like, that's pretty rare. DJ Glaze was also drafted in the 3rd round as a tackle that could be their 3rd or their 4th tackle, depending on where they feel Pete fits. So to me, this is like, no matter the injury situation, this is going to be a productive offensive line that's got plenty of depth. I think plenty of angry individuals that are physical, tough, like downhill monsters. Like, that's what I love about this offensive line makeup. They're all like athletic run blocking extraordinaires, and they're just really like old school mentalities. They're like defensive linemen in the head, which is always to have a good thing, you know, on the offensive line, to be able to just be angry and that mentality that we're going to run you over on each and every snap. So I think this offensive line is probably the most underrated line in the NFL entering this season. I don't think anyone is talking about the Raiders' offensive line, but I think it could be very legit this year. I wouldn't be shocked. Then you look at the defensive line. Again, the identity of this team being that they are a line of scrimmage football team. And I would argue that they are the only team in their division for sure that can go toe-to-toe with the Chiefs. And I think that if the Raiders are going to surprise a lot of people, the O-line and the D-line is going to have to be the reason why. Because you're not going to ask Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell to all of a sudden turn into Josh Allen overnight. But if these two units are truly really good, well, that can uplift everything else, right? A great defensive line can uplift maybe just an average cornerback group. Or maybe a great offensive line that's able to run the ball and get a ground game going can uplift the passing game to allow maybe a marginal quarterback to succeed, right? And help those receivers really take over with extra time to get open. So we'll get to that section of the roster, but I feel like the defensive line is also one that's heavily slept on. Again, this is the most underrated roster in the league. Nobody's talking about the defensive line of the Raiders outside of Raiders fans. First of all, Mad Max Crosby is arguably the best edge rusher in the NFL. All around edge rusher, there isn't anybody that is more complete or more consistent or plays more snaps at a higher rate than Max Crosby. He is that good. He is in the conversation for the best defensive player in the NFL, along with Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons. These guys are the best defensive players in the league. They all play edge rusher, and Max Crosby is right there. Nick Bosa, I guess you can include him as well. But Crosby has been known for consistency in both departments, pass rush and run defense. Last year, he was a terrorizer from the edge as a pass rusher. And he's got great finesse, great motor. He's got good, extremely great hand usage, the ability to get around a tackle. But man, his tone setting, his ability to lead a defense, his ability to play with effort on each and every play, no matter the situation, the score, or whatever, is admirable. And that sets the tone for this defense, making them, I think, a really tough challenge for any offensive line because you have to double Max Crosby. You have to treat him with that respect. And then now you bring in an absolute monster in the middle in Christian Wilkins, a guy that is probably, one of the top run defenders in the NFL at defensive tackle, but then just last year had his best pass rushing season of his career with, I think, over 10 sacks, maybe even 12 and a half off the top of my head. Christian Wilkins is a monster. He's a former first-round pick, high pedigree player that was drafted by one of the best defensive minds in football, Brian Flores from Miami. He developed into a monster in all facets, and he is going to be the first elite player that Max Crosby has ever teamed up with, truly, in his career, potentially, on the defensive line. So you have a monster in the middle in Wilkins, who is a 3-down player who can play in all situations, who you don't take off the field. And you have Max Crosby, who you play in all situations, a 3-down player who never comes off the field, like literally. So you've got Crosby, you've got Wilkins, you've got two players in all situations. Now, let's support them with other solutions in different facets. So Kuntz is somebody that really developed last year, and he graded as the 22nd best edge rusher in football last year, the 22nd also in pass rushing. He is an underrated finesse speed rusher that complements Max Crosby very well. He, to me, is more of a sub-package player, but he's also a little bit more of a rotation player. But to me, he can mix in. He might not be playing as much as Crosby, clearly, but he'll probably be a starter on most plays, especially when it comes to pass rushing. And you plug him in on those second and longs, those third and longs, especially if you're stuffing the run the way that this team could potentially stuff the run, given the department of having Max Crosby, given the fact that you've got Wilkins, these guys that are really good against the run as well, that are going to be, and even the linebackers the Raiders have, to be able to stuff the run on early downs, to be able to get Kuntz on the field, to be able to torch people off the edge with speed and finesse and pass rushing arsenal, right? So you've got Kuntz, you've got Crosby on the edges, you've got Wilkins inside. So let's continue to build this out, right? So you've got Tyree Wilson, who is a first-round pick, a top 10 selection last year. He was injured last year. He came back. He didn't really have an offseason. There was very limited coaching for him last year. They couldn't really get him on the field healthy 100% early in the year. So now he's got a full offseason. We've already seen pictures of him looking huge. And it does appear to me that Tyree Wilson is going to be an inside-out player. And what that means is he's going to play inside on pass rushing snaps like a Michael Bennett, but also be able to play on the edge, to be able to set the edge on early downs. Let's say if they take Kuntz off the field and add a larger individual to the interior of the defensive line to help them against the run. So I could see Tyree Wilson almost multiplying this defensive line. If Tyree Wilson is not being counted on to be the absolute stud out of the top 10 that people maybe thought he would be in year one, now that he's coming back from injury, has less kind of pressure on him to succeed, is going to be playing less snaps overall, and is going to just be able to rotate in as if he was a rookie. That's going to allow him to be in maximizable situations to get the most out of his skill set. And I loved Tyree Wilson coming out of the draft. Love his long arms, his reach, but then you combine that length and that reach with explosion and speed, and now let's see how he looks physically. You could have a guy that could be a terror on the inside as a pass rusher, and then be, big enough, long enough to be able to manhandle tackles in the run game. So that is just, that's deadly. If you put Wilson, let's say on third down, your pass rushing department or defensive line will be Kuntz on one edge, Crosby on the other, Tyree Wilson and Wilkins. That's your four-man rush. You don't really have to blitz that much with those four guys rushing the quarterback. Now, let's say on first down, it's 1st and 10, you're against a run-heavy team. Let's say you're playing the Cleveland Browns, and you've got to stop the run in Nick Chubb. Now you can have Tyree Wilson on the edge with Crosby on the edge, Wilkins in the middle, and John Jenkins in the middle, who is the big run stuffer of the group in the defensive tackle position, grading 57th from Pro Football Focus, has been around the NFL for a while. He is a pure run-stuffing defensive tackle. You also have some decent depth behind those players. Adam Butler is a favorite of mine. He persevered off the field with some health situations and scares. He's a former Super Bowl champion with my Patriots, and he is great in pass rushing schemes and games and things. And he's really good in, if you want to rotate him in as well. Tyree Wilson, maybe he plays, first down, run, snap. He's a little bit tired. You need a guy on third down and 8. You could just put Adam Butler in there as one of the defensive tackles to get to the quarterback. He's a little bit undersized, but very quick inside, very good hands. So to me, like Adam Butler is one of those guys you can plug in and play. And then Byron Young was a 3rd-round pick, I believe, from the McDaniels regime, who's also kind of a bit of a hybrid edge player. So they've got a lot of depth here. The line of scrimmage for the Raiders could be absolutely ridiculous in 2024. So this is why you shouldn't be sleeping on this roster and this team, because they've got a lot of different ways where they could be a really tough team to run the ball on, a really tough team to stop the run against, and then even have a deadly pass rush. So the line of scrimmage identity, the physicality, the toughness, and the speed of this unit is going to really lead them in 2024. But then you add the rest of the roster, and speaking about the rest of the roster, you've got the quarterback position, first of all. Remember, this was a team that had Jimmy Garoppolo playing some of the worst ball I've ever seen him play in his career. Perhaps a rundown and no good anymore Jimmy Garoppolo last year. He just didn't have it. I mean, he was toast. He couldn't move. His arms just shot. It's gone. He's a pure backup at this point in his career, and it really felt like anytime they put Aiden O'Connell in the game as a rookie late-round pick, he was better than Jimmy Garoppolo. So just imagine how they might be able to improve at quarterback this year with maybe a little bit more of a simplistic scheme, definitely more of an identity, understanding that they're a run-first team, better weaponry around the quarterback, and I would say, a more mature quarterback position, a better quarterback position, whether it be Gardner Minshew, who can still play a bit, or Aiden O'Connell in year 2. So O'Connell is probably the high upside case for this position, given that he's a second-year pro and he is a young player and you never know the jump he could take. I think he's got a strong arm, and I think he knows where to go with the ball. I don't love necessarily his mobility. I don't necessarily love his rhythm or feel for the pocket or, maneuvering and making plays and throwing the ball on time at times. But For the most part, I thought he was a good fit for what they were doing last year and seems to have the admiration and respect from his teammates. And I think he's got like a sneaky pocket passer ability to him. So I wouldn't be shocked if O'Connell became that guy. But Gardner Minshew he's just been super underrated his whole career. Like, he was an excellent backup in Philly. He had better statistics than Trevor Lawrence for a couple of years there in Jacksonville. He was a good player in Jacksonville. He just didn't want to win a lot of games because they were terrible. Like, they were an awful team. Philadelphia, he was able to plug in for Jalen Hurts. And Indianapolis last year, he's one game away from making the playoffs on the Colts, a team that no one expected to make the playoffs. And yeah, his stats aren't always pretty, but what I love about Minshew, he's an absolute gamer. He is a great leader of men. He is truly himself. Like, he is Gardner Minshew, and players love that and respect that. It's very Baker Mayfield-esque. He's not as talented as Baker in terms of arm strength or all that stuff, but Minshew is very savvy. He doesn't turn the ball over very much, which is a great fit for a defensive run-first team. He is mostly accurate with the ball. He can put some nice loft and touch on deep balls, and I think he could have a good connection with a guy like Davante Adams and Jacoby Myers working the short and intermediate levels of the field, because I think that's where really his game is at its best. And he's also pretty, like, sneaky good in the pocket and, like, finding lanes to scramble and things like that. So Minshew will win over the team. Like, there's no question. As a cheap option at quarterback, you could go a lot worse than Gardner Minshew. I've always thought he was one of the most disrespected and denied and underrated backup quarterbacks. I thought he was the best backup entering last year. I thought he proved that last year. So quarterback should be better. The wide receiver play is already there. I mean, Davante Adams is still playing at a high level. Last year, obviously, had to deal with multiple quarterbacks, not the best rhythm on offense, uncertainty in terms of their head coach getting fired, offensive scheme sort of changing, the run game sort of being the biggest area of attack there. But Adams is still a number one X receiver that you can line up on the outside and you can ask him to win consistently off his release, and you can ask defenses to have to double team. Jacoby Myers is pretty much the perfect guy, as we saw last year, to be able to take care of one-on-one coverage. Like, in New England, he was their go-to target, their number one guy, their third down chain mover. He goes to the Raiders last year. He becomes more of the number two, and instantly he looks like a guy that can't be stopped because everybody is trying to stop Davante Adams. And that's really where Myers finds his niche of being that really good separator route runner at the short and intermediate level of the field with actually deceptive size, really soft hands, really reliable option in the red zone and on third down. So he's a perfect number two to Adams because you can almost do the same thing with both players, but Adams is just a better version. Brock Bowers is like one of the best tight end prospects we've ever seen. You can put him in line. You can put him as the F tight end, right? Or the Y tight end, which means Y is in line. F is the move tight end, right? Think Gronk and Hernandez is the best example to use, right? Bowers is like the Hernandez, where you can put him in the slot. You can move him out wide. You can put him in the backfield. You can hand him the ball. Like, this guy's going to be dynamic after the catch, which is maybe an element that they missed last year. He's going to be a one-on-one threat against linebackers. You're going to have to cover him with safeties. It's going to change the way that quarterbacks are going to be able to read the offense because they're going to be able to know the matchup or the coverage based on who they put on Brock Bowers. And at the same time, like, he could also be an advantage in terms of being an H-back in the backfield, being a fullback type thing. So there's a lot of different things you could do with him, and I think he's going to have an impact right away, not only in terms of the personnel they can use, but also just his pure athletic ability. You combine that with Michael Mayer entering year two, where largely tight ends get a lot better. He's more of the Y inline tight end. That's the blocking variety, but he's got soft hands. And I think he could really develop in having a little bit less pressure this year. He wasn't really utilized that well last year, and he wasn't really asked to do a lot. So that's where I could see him, providing another dimension to this offense where they could do more two tight end sets with Bowers and Michael Mayer. They could have three receiver sets, but with two tight ends on the field where Bowers is in the slot and Mayer is at tight end, right? So that's 12 personnel, but it's really 11 personnel sort of deal, where 12 personnel meaning two tight ends, two receivers, but it's actually 11 personnel, three receivers, one tight end, one running back, right? But then you could also have Bowers in the backfield with the two receivers and Mayer at tight end, right? So there's a lot of different things you can do in terms of just that package alone. And then you bring in guys like Trey Tucker, who can stretch the field, Michael Mayer, or not Michael Mayer, but Michael Gallup. Another Michael joins the fold, who Michael Gallup's a proven, number 3 wide receiver in the NFL. He can play the X if you need him to. That means you can move Jacoby Myers into the slot if you want. Trey Tucker provides some speed with 17.4 yards per catch as a rookie last year, 19 catches for 331 yards. So that's that speed element that really Adams and Myers and the tight ends don't really have, right? Jalen Guyton is even a bit of a speed off the bench type deal. But so you could have different formations where maybe your base personnel is 12 with Bowers more of a slot receiver type. But then you could also have, packages where you have Gallup and, Gallup with Adams on the outside, Jacoby Myers in the slot, Brock Bowers at tight end, right? You take Mayer off the field and you've got maybe like Amir Abdullah in the backfield. So you can do a lot of different things there with all that different personnel. Zamir White is a running back that I could see taking a huge step forward this year. He gained a ton of confidence late last year as a power runner of the football. He is a pure first and second down, really running back in a Jacobs type mold. I think he's actually a little bit deceptively more explosive in long runs, but he doesn't really have the well-rounded game that Jacobs has in terms of his pass blocking and pass catching. But there's other backs in this backfield that could definitely take the hold of that situation work. In terms of other players on this team, I'm excited for the weaponry and seeing how they're going to use it in the offense. But defensively, you continue to expand on this roster and the depth and the skill that they have. The linebacker position, I think, also improved. You've got Robert Spillane, who was one of the most lovely breakouts of last year, like a veteran linebacker who is largely a special teamer in most of the places he played. Pittsburgh, right? 16th last year, according to PFF, at linebacker, was way better and way more smooth in coverage than ever expected. Played 1,100 snaps for this team. Has always been a good tackler and a good downhill linebacker. Fits the defense perfectly. They bring in a rookie that's very reminiscent in Eichenberg out of Ohio State, who's another big white linebacker that's like a downhill sledgehammer. Can they find some role for him in the run game potentially? Diablo is more of that athletic kind of sideline to sideline speed linebacker. He graded 60th last year, but he had 771 snaps. They rely on him a lot. Masterton was really good when he played, only 182 snaps, but had an above 80 PFF grade. So they've got 4 linebackers that I believe in their situation there. Safety-wise, I think they're a little bit weak in the depth, but Trayvon Moehrig continues to improve. He graded 30th last year. Marcus Epps, the former Eagle, 55th last season. Want to see more out of Chris Smith in year number 2. Polo Mayo, I believe is his name. Not too familiar with his game, but he did play about 100 to 200 snaps last year as a depth safety. He was really their 3rd or 4th safety last season. But their corner position could also be sneaky decent if they can get better production out of their CB2. And what I mean by CB2 is their perimeter corner number 2. Jacorian Bennett was that player last year as a pure rookie. I believe from game 1 he was starting. He was terrible last year in terms of PFF grade, 124th. And he was definitely the weak link of the defense. But if they could maybe sign another veteran to give him some backup there, but maybe they believe in him. Maybe they believe this is a breakout year for him. But I like Nate Hobbs and I like Jack Jones a lot. Jack Jones is a pure playmaking corner, really reacts to the ball well, great ball skills. I'm kind of distraught at what happened and how it ended in New England, but the Raiders, Antonio Pierce has a relationship with him. You would hope that continues to improve in terms of his personal life and sticking to football and playing at that high level that he's capable of as an athlete. It's just a matter of keeping his head on straight. Nate Hobbs is an excellent player. He's better in the nickel position though, and he's probably one of the better nickel corners in the NFL when he's in there. They also have, other corners that are veterans that aren't terrible coming off the bench, but I would like them if they could sign like a Steph Gilmore or if they could sign like a Xavier Howard or something like that. That would be pretty cool. I would be really into that because I think that would really, in a lot of ways, complete their defense. With the pass rush that they have, the defensive line, the run defense, the solid linebacker play, the solid enough safety play. If they just added one more corner to this group, I think they would for sure have a top 10 defense. Because last year, they finished 9th in points allowed, which was much better than anyone would have thought, and they were 15th in yards allowed. And that was kind of the weakness that everyone expected them to have was defense. But actually, it was the reverse. The offense was kind of weak last year. The defense kind of carried them late in the year. So if they can find a little bit more production out of the consistency of the passing game on offense, a little bit better quarterback play. I mean, this team could really be on the rise in 2024. But overall, even if they don't make the playoffs or whatever, even if you're not going to pick them to make the playoffs, which I probably won't, I think the reason is quarterback. But again, if this team had an elite quarterback, they would be in the Super Bowl window. Like, if they had Stroud, if they had Herbert, if they had Allen. If you switch Josh Allen onto this team and you put Gardner Minshew on the Bills, we're talking about the Raiders as a legit threat to the Chiefs. And we're not talking about the Bills, maybe as the first overall pick, right? So, like, that is the difference for this team. To me, like, the Raiders, man, this is a really all-around good team. Like, I'm not just talking about a team that has a good offensive line or a team that has a good kicker. Right? They do. A team that has a good offensive line or defensive line or, like, one unit that you really like. Like, there's some teams that I like the Vikings offensive line. I like the Vikings receivers. But there's areas of their defense that I don't really like. I think they're really propped up by coaching. But to me, the Raiders, like, I like their defensive line. I like their linebackers. I like their corners. I like their receivers. I like their tight ends. There's so many elements of the Raiders roster that they have. It's just that they're really missing the most important area, and that's what causes them to be underrated. So for me, the Raiders, I'm really excited to watch them because I think they're a throwback type of team, and I'm intrigued to see how that goes over in 2024. But let me know where you stand on the Raiders for 2024. Gronk spiked the like button. Thanks for watching, Raiders fans, and share this with all of Raider Nation. It's Mitch. We'll see you in the next one. Subscribe. Peace.